Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a new series devoted to, well, how to describe humor in music. Now, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because one of the most amazing things about music is its ability to be funny. And we all know it can be funny, but I have hesitated about doing this for a bunch of reasons. The first is that if you have to explain a joke, it isn't funny anymore. I mean, either you get it or you don't, right? I mean, that's sort of how humor works. It strikes you. It's a function of surprise and the unexpected. And to rationalize the whole thing is to take a lot of the joy out of it and a lot of that element. The second thing is that it's a function of your personal impressions of things. No two people have exactly the same sense of humor, of course, and humor is very tightly bound up with our notions of taste and propriety. And so our willingness to recognize humor depends on the extent to which we're open to it and the circumstances. In the classical music world, oh my God, humor is not a priority. Let's put it that way. It even is frowned on. Oh, it's just terrible, you know. It has to be serious and lofty. Never mind the fact that humor is one of the loftiest sentiments that human beings have. I mean, it's a special quality, but we don't appreciate it as such, particularly not in hoity-toity cultural settings. And the third thing is that humor is a function of language. Verbal humor, obviously, and in music, it's a function of the extent to which you know the language that the composer is speaking. Now, all of these are surmountable. And this last one, knowing the language, it's just a function of how much time you spend with it. It teaches you itself, but you've got to be willing to learn it, and you've got to put the time in, and there's no getting around it. But I said, okay, if that's the case, let me see if I can do this by taking a topical approach, by looking at certain types of humor as they're embodied in music, and you know, we'll see where it goes. So I'm starting with the first and most obvious quality of humor in music, and that is slapstick. That's the most obvious quality of humor generally. Somebody trips and falls, and it's funny. They get a pie in the face, and it's funny. You know, that kind of humor. You might call it crude humor. But music is perfectly capable of that. The most obvious way music does it is by indulging in wrong notes where they're unexpected. For example, Mozart's musical joke where the players are making a mess of the actual notes, and it's very funny because the music ends with a crunching, horrible dissonance where you know it's not supposed to. Or the drunken song in the Battaglia, the battle scene by Bieber, where all the drunken soldiers are singing their songs in different keys and it becomes just a horrendous mess. Or Hindemith's piece for string quartet, the Wagner's overture to the Flying Dutchman is played by a drunk village band the morning after an insane carouse, and it's just a mess. He basically takes the piece and destroys it with wrong notes and rhythms and messed up entrances. All of those things are very funny. They really are, but they're obviously funny. And so they don't require that you learn a language, the syntax of the music so much in order to appreciate it. Now, of course, the king, the guy who brought humor into music as a permanent feature and who was the greatest musical comedian of all times was Haydn. And Haydn's music is funny in all the ways music can be funny, just about, although we will move beyond him as we get past the classical period. But I'm going to start with Haydn, and I'm going to start with slapstick. And I have three brief examples, and then we're going to get out of here because humor cannot go on too long or it doesn't become funny. It just becomes boring, and I don't want that to happen. So we're going to rip through these examples as our first test case. The first example comes from Haydn's Symphony number 60, Il Distratto, the distracted. This was originally music for a play. It was incidental music. The play was a comedy. This piece is full of humorous hijinks. They're all over the place in all different kinds of humor. But one of the great slapstick moments in musical humor occurs in the finale, which is only a minute and a bit long because it's a 6-movement piece. And there's a connection between the previous movement and the finale. But once the finale gets going, something awful happens. The violins realize that they haven't tuned, and that their strings need to be adjusted. And that's what they do in the middle of the finale. They stop, they listen, they retune, and then they start again so that they can finish the finale. And it's a very funny moment. There you go. I told you. Wasn't that a riot? Aren't you just just buckled over with laughter? That's what happens with humor. But I want you to hear it. I want you to hear the moment and appreciate it for the humorous little interlude that it is. These are all from the Naxos Complete Haydn Symphony Cycle, and here it is. Now, as I hope you could hear, the movement has a few other tricks up its sleeve, like that weird little Hungarian-sounding minor key thing that happens afterwards. But that's the bottom line. It's a slapstick bit of humor. It's the slip on the banana peel kind of humor. The next example comes from Haydn's Symphony number 93, the slow movement. Now, of course, part of Haydn's genius is that he reserves some of his funniest moments for his slow movements, because the slow movement, as Haydn knew, were the movements that people usually think were the most boring or where they tended to nod off, but also that are the most serious, where we have serene lyrical melodies or tender pathos or touching moments of intimate sentiment. And so that's where he throws the joke, to jolt you out of it. And he got a lot of guff for that when he was writing. People thought he wasn't serious, and he wasn't. And that was a good thing. But he was serious about being funny, and that's a marvelous thing. So, Symphony number 93, the slow movement. It begins in the most tender and sweet way imaginable, with a solo string quartet playing the main theme. Then the full orchestra takes it in. It's just luscious and beautiful and gorgeous. And in the last statement of that theme, we hear, well, listen to this. Yes, that is a fart. That's what the bassoon does. Now, most performances don't make enough of the fart. The only conductor who really let it rip, I mean in the most ribald possible way, was George Szell, where it sounds like a foghorn going off. It's just fabulously funny. But the interesting thing about that is notice what happens afterwards. The orchestra laughs. You hear, bah, and then, ya-dun, da-dun, da-da. That is laughter. It's a rarefied or stylized version of orchestral laughter. And the wonderful thing about that particular bit of laughter, and this is so characteristic of Haydn, is that that little motive, which becomes the laughter, is part of the main theme from the very beginning. It's a development of music that we've heard before. That is so typical of Haydnesque humor. It's not just slapstick like, you don't expect a pie in the face. It's logical. And the logic of the humor makes it actually more funny because it's something familiar. It's something that's inevitable while being surprising at the same time. That may be paradoxical, but there it is. And I've explained it, and either you'll get it or you don't get it, but there it is. It's pretty remarkable. Now, the last example comes from, you probably saw this coming a mile away. Haydn's Surprise Symphony. It's the surprise. Of course, it's interesting, American and English culture being more humorous than German culture. That's, I suppose, debatable. No, it's not debatable. Who are we kidding? Those people have no sense of humor. So we call it the surprise. We nickname the symphony for the humorous bit. In German, it's called Mit den Paukenschlag, the symphony with the drum stroke. Ha ha. That immediately tells you what the cultural difference is in appreciating humor. So there we go. We value it more than they do. Haydn, of course, was Hungary and Austrian. He wasn't, strictly speaking, nationalistic German the way the 19th century understood it. So all of the humor hadn't been sucked out of him when he was writing this stuff. Now, the thing about the Surprise Symphony, the drum stroke, the humorous bit, is that it's just a loud bang that's supposed to wake people up in an unexpected moment. Most performances either don't make enough of it or they do something stupid with it to exaggerate it ridiculously. And that is a very, it brings out the fact that there is an element of taste involved in all of this. You have to do it right. It's a function of timing. It's a function of all of those qualities that will make it funny. And the way to make it funny is to play it exactly as Haydn wrote it. Now, that's so hard for most musicians to do because they have no sense of humor. And then when they do, they try to make a point of it, which is wrong. Oh, it's such a mess. Anyway, here is a nice, normal version of the opening of the slow movement of the Surprise Symphony, where you will hear the bang, but I let it go a little bit further because I want to make a point afterwards. And then we'll wrap up this first little bit. So here is the slow movement of the Surprise Symphony. Now, did you notice something? There isn't just one surprise. It's called in German with the drum stroke. Well, it's not exactly true because after the big surprise, the theme concludes and then it repeats. And on the repeats, on its first note, both times, there's another surprise. Bum, 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 right? Again, what Haydn is doing is, first of all, he's stretching the joke out. He's letting more of the movement get involved in the fun. Second of all, he's explaining it in a way. He's saying, oh, well, yeah, okay, you might have thought that was out of place, but no, it's actually happening again and again. So there's a logic to the humor. And it's that kind of thing that makes Haydn's humor so potent. It's, again, that paradox, that paradoxical sense of it being both surprising but also understandable. He wants you to get the joke. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of musical explanation in there too, just to make the point that he's not being gratuitous. And I think that that's a function of the best musical humor, the fact that it's at once funny, but at once inevitable. You can see the banana peel, and it's like Hitchcock's definition of suspense, right? The difference between horror and suspense. Horror is when a slasher comes out and stabs someone and there's buckets of blood and it's disgusting, and that's horror. Suspense is when you know that the slasher is behind the corner and the person who's going to get slashed doesn't know. And so the director creates suspense by screwing up the tension. When are they going to get slashed? Because they're there, and don't step there, don't do that. Well, Haydn is operating in the same way. He's building tension. He's exploiting tension to enhance our sense of humor. I don't know if any of that made sense. It's a function of knowing the language, of listening and beginning to appreciate and understand what Haydn's doing. But music can have the slapstick variety of humor. And so that's our first humorous quality. And we're going to cover all the rest. We're going to deal with wit and irony and parody and all of those ways that music can be humorous in the course of this discussion, this series of discussions. I'm not quite sure how many there will be, maybe 4 or 5, but I hope you'll stick with me. And I think we're going to learn something and experience something wondrous about what music can be, something that's terribly, terribly underrated and dismissed in classical music circles especially. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.